we begin the new parak Toilin. The topic that we're going to see in this Mishnah is borer, and really separating, selecting the good from the bad through a mishameres, which is essentially a sieve, but a cloth, sort of like a cheesecloth that you would use for wine and for wine sediment, where you'd put the sediment in and let it drip out, or other forms of allowing a liquid to drip out from the mix itself. So that's a mishameres. There are two issues here. One is the actual selecting the good from the bad by putting it into the sifter, into the cheesecloth, and letting it run through. That's the selecting issue. But the way they would do it as well created an issue of bonnet, of construction. Because what they would do is they would pull the cloth over the top of the barrel and affix it tightly around the top of the barrel. And this way they can pour the water through the sediment, etc., to get the as much of the wine out from the sediment. And that connection of putting the top on is a oil arai. It's a temporary tent. That's a concept in halacha that we saw already, oil arai. And you're not allowed to make, even though that it's a temporary tent, oil arai, we're going to see some of the rules are that you're not allowed to make an oil arai. What constitutes an oil arai? So we saw earlier in the Masechta, Rashi says it's the creation of the roof, the top part. So creating a cover for some space beneath it. And Tosa says even creating the sides would also constitute as an oil arai, but it would have to be an effective and have some sort of effective manner and have some relevance to some halacha, such as creating an eruv wall, etc. So we have the concept of enos and oil arai. You're not allowed to make even a temporary ohel. But the definition is when you're making a cover for a space beneath it. And so when you cover the barrel with this cheesecloth, even though that your first and primary thought is in order to make a sifter for the sediment, but you're also benefiting because the space beneath is a barrel that has wine in it, or the juices are going to run through into it. And this serves as a cover, and that in and of itself is a significant value to what it is that you're making here, a covered barrel. And that covered space is an oil arai and is going to be prohibited. We're not going to be able to talk about it, but this Gemara is the basis for the accepted halachic norm of not using an umbrella on Shabbos as well, on account of creating that oil arai, a temporary cover for a space beneath. So Rabbi Eliezer says there's a distinction between Shabbos and Yontif. You're allowed to put on that, we'll call it a cheesecloth, over the barrel on Yontif, and that spreading of it is not going to be prohibited as a tent beneath it. So you can actually put this on on Yontif, and the reason is because he's making an oil arai, he's making a temporary tent, and on Yontif that would be permissible. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. But Shabbos you're not allowed to put it on. However, if it's already on before Shabbos, meaning that cheesecloth has been put onto the barrel and is tight and it's properly placed, then he's allowed to put the sediment onto that and allow for it to drain into the barrel, because this is not a proper form of borer. This is not a proper form of selecting, as the Gemara is going to tell us. This is not the way selecting typically is done. The Chachamim say, "Ein toilenas ha'mishameres b'yantiv." The Chachamim say, "No, you're not allowed to put it on, even on yantiv, on account of that it is an oil arai. You're creating this temporary tent. You're creating a cover to a space. And even if it's already there, you cannot put the sediment on because you're going to cause a separation of the part you want, the part from the part you don't want, meaning you're selecting the juices from out of the mixture, and that's going to be butter. That's selecting, which is prohibited. But on yantiv, you are allowed to put it on. So now the Gemara is going to first challenge, how can Rabbi Eliezer say that you're allowed to put on this cheesecloth on top of the barrel to create this, which is essentially going to create a space that's covered beneath it, and that's making an oil arai. You're making a temporary tent, and that's prohibited. And in fact, Rabbi Eliezer even says you're not allowed to add to a tent. We saw this earlier in the window by putting in the shutters to the window, where Rabbi Eliezer said you're only allowed to put it in if it's attached and hanging. But if it's detached or it's sitting on the ground, you cannot put it in because then you're adding to the building. Only if it's already attached to the wall and off the ground. So then you could say it's already part of the structure, so you're allowed to put it in. So over there, you're only adding to an existing structure, and yet Rabbi Eliezer says it's prohibited. Rabbi Eliezer asufi oil arai lemesafinan lemevad lechatchila shari. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't allow to add to an existing structure. He's going to allow to make a new structure. Mahi, what is that case? The time we learned, the shutters of window. If it's hanging and off the ground and attached to the wall, then you're allowed to put it into the window. But if not, you're not allowed to put it into the window. You're not allowed to close up the window with these shutters, even though they're designated to it. But you're adding to the structure. The Chachamim disagree and say you are allowed to. And to that, Rabbi Yochanan said, everybody agrees. You're not allowed to make an oil arai. You're not allowed to make a new tent, a temporary cover over a space on Yantiv, and for sure not on Shabbos. And the machlokas is only as if you're adding to an existing structure. Rabbi Eliezer says you're not even allowed to add on Yantif, and for sure you can't add on Shabbos. And the Chachamim say you're allowed to add to an existing structure on Shabbos, and for sure on Yantif. So the Gemara says Rabbi Eliezer Savar like Rabbi Yehuda. He follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why he allows putting this cloth on the barrel. What's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? The Tanya, the first opinion says the only distinction between Shabbos and Yantiv is doing that which is food, making food on Yantiv, food that is common for people. Rabbi Yehuda matir af machshirei echal nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda says even machshirin, even not only the food itself, but the machshirin, the work for the food is also going to be permissible to be done on Yantiv, and even if it could have been done before Yantiv. Now everybody agrees, and we saw this, that if you could have done it before Yantiv and it would have stayed, it would be fresh and okay. That and then you have to do it before Yantiv. You're not allowed to do it on Shabbat, on Yantiv itself. But over here, Rabbi Yehuda is going to say that even the machshirin are permissible, and Rabbi Eliezer is going to agree with that. One second, let me just finish the line. When do we hear that Yehuda says that you're allowed to do the prep work? That's if you can't do it before Yantiv. So if you could have done it before Yantiv, he would also agree that you can do it. Rabbi Eliezer, for the Rabbi Yehuda, yes, Rabbi Eliezer is even more lenient, and says that not only the food itself that couldn't have done that you couldn't do that you could do before Yom Tov, even machshirin that you could do before Yom Tov, even the prep work that you could have done before Yom Tov, you're allowed to do on Yom Tov, and therefore you're allowed to put this on in order to create a separation between the wine and the sediment, because that's prep for your food, wine being a staple, and you're allowed to do that in Yom Tov, even the prep. Tessa says it only on account of that it's Rabbanan. Tessa says it's only on account that this really is not a Torah prohibition because it's an oil arai, making a temporary attempt is the Rabbanan. And Rashi says the main thing is that he's just allows for machshirin to be done.
Okay, I got a custom, but I need to go back for a second. Moisifin means that the argument was if it had a hinge, you couldn't use it, or it's just adding to it.
If it had an inch,
a hinge. What does Mosifin mean here? What do they mean?
There's already an existing structure and you're only adding to it.
So like putting on something with a hinge, like a baby, like a stroller cover.
No. We're not up to something that's hinged to it, because the Rabbi Eliezer is talking about a case that you have a shutter that's hanging off. It's not on account of that it's hinged, meaning it's already affixed to that place. Mosifin means that there's already a partial structure and you're adding to it.
So you have a window, you have a shutter, so you couldn't put the shutter back where it was in the window.
You may. That's Mosifin. That's adding.
That's the machloikis. Not that there's not you couldn't close the window shutter, so to speak.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Rabbi Eliezer is even more lenient in regards to Achal Nefesh, that not only itself, but also the machshirin, the prep work for it, can be done on Yantiv itself, even if it could have been done before Yantiv. The Chachamim say that you're not allowed to do this. So Yibayluhu talamai. Okay, so you're not allowed to put on this cloth on top of the barrel, which creates a selecting system, a separating, like a sieve. Yibayluhu talamai. You put it on even though you're not supposed to. Amar Rav Yosef Talachayv Chatas. Rav Yosef says if he did so, he has to bring a sin offering because he transgressed a Torah prohibition. Amalei Abaye said, "What are you talking about?" Elameata. If that's the case, the Chachamim hold it's a Torah prohibition, and Rabbi Eliezer says you're allowed to do it. We never have such a thing where there's going to be such a far difference, where one says it's a Torah prohibition, the other says even rabbinically it's not prohibited, it's permissible. And he says, but Abaye asks, what did he do? How can this be considered a Torah prohibition? After all he's done is hang something on a space that's already there. Tola kuza besichta. If somebody hangs a measuring cup up on a hook on the wall, is that considered construction? So too here, what did he do? He created a vessel and put it on top of a barrel. He took a cloth and put it on top of a barrel to create a sieve. It's true that it may be prohibited, but it cannot be a Torah prohibition. What did he do? It's not a proper structure. Elam Abaya, now we're on Kufla Ches Amid Aleph 138a. Elam Abaya says midrabanani. It's a rabbinic prohibition. What exactly is this rabbinic prohibition? Is a lengthy discussion in the Rishonim. We're going to go with Rashi here, which is somewhat opaque as to what it is. Elam midrabanani. It's a rabbinic prohibition. The Chachamim prohibited it simply because it looks like a weekday a non-Shabbos work. It looks like you're doing work, and there are some times where you're not actually doing any of the 39 malachas or anything related per se to the 39 malachas, but it looks like it seems like you're doing difficult work connected to one of the 39 malachas, and therefore it's prohibited as uvdin dechol, is the term Chazal usually use. It's just weekday-like work, and that's what Rashi says. This is the prohibition here. So Abaye gathered several mishnayos where there's a stringency like this, that something's prohibited, and he taught it this way. Hagud. This is a sort of like a leather upside down cone that people would put their canteens in when they rested overnight, in order for the canteen to stay cool from the wind and keep whatever liquid is in the canteen cool. So agud. So that using that on Shabbos and putting it on pegs on Shabbos is similar to creating a tent, because you're stretching it over over pegs, and so it covers the space beneath it, and there's an intent to use it for cooling, and therefore it's prohibited. Vamashameres, in our case, of putting this cloth over a barrel. Kilo, covering a bed with what's the term for it? A bed curtain. I forget the term.
Canopy.
Canopy. Thank you. The bed canopies, but a kila, as we'll see later, is a bed canopy. Kilas chasanim is a bed canopy that we're talking about. That's prohibited. Is the upside down V shape, the one that has a single pole across the center of the bed with the canopy cloth coming off on both sides.
Pup tent.
Sorry?
Pup tent.
Pup tent. You use that even for a bed canopy? Pup tent canopy?
It's the same shape. I mean, it's
the shape, yes. Okay, yeah. Vikise galin, and basically the early IKEA chairs that would, portable chairs that would come apart and you'd put together as you travel. All these, lo ya'aseh. You're not allowed to make them on Shabbos. The im asa patar avalasa, but if you did do so, that you would be exempt of a sin offering, because it's a rabbinic prohibition, because these are not proper construction, but nevertheless prohibited because they are similar to construction and prohibited. Of course, if you made a permanent tent, that you cannot do, and if you did, that would be a chatas offering on account of a transgression that requires a chatas offering on account of that's a Torah prohibition. Aval mita, but they're beds which were basically upright, and you'd have to vertical, and you'd have to lay them down horizontal every night. Those that you haven't done anything, and it's not made for the space beneath it, and so it's permissible to do. The kisa traskel, and a folding chair. Basically, they'd have these cloth folding chairs, like lawn chairs, that would fold, and when you opened it up, the cloth, the leather or material would stretch across it, so you can sit in it. And again, that's made for the space above it. It's not made for the space below. The asla, and basically their toilet seats. Mutal and tesel, those you put down on Shabbos, those would not be a prohibition, even rabbinic. John, you have a question?
I was just going to say that, yeah, beach chair.
Yeah. And it's from this distinction that the Gemara makes over here, saying the beach chair is permissible because it's made for the space above. And that's why it's permissible, is where the Noda B'Yehuda says that we see that an umbrella would be prohibited because it's made for the space below. And you're not allowed to put it into you're not allowed to put the sediment into an already spread cloth on Shabbos on account of that you're separating the juices that you want from the juices that you don't want, and that's selecting and with a utensil, with a sieve, and prohibited. So what happens if somebody did do this on Shabbos? Amar Rav Kahana Shimer Chayv Chatas. So Shimer, if he did so, that's going to be a Chatas offering. It's a Torah prohibition. Maskefla Rav Sheshes mi ikamidi de Merabana mechayv Chatas or Rabbi Eliezer shar lechatchila. How can it be that this is something Rabbi Eliezer says you're allowed to do, no problem, and the Chachamim say, oh, not only are you not allowed to do it, but if you did so, you have to bring a Chatas offering because it is a Torah prohibition. That's too far a jump between the two opinions. They're at the two extremes. Maskefla Rav Yisrael, as he said, Rabbi Yisrael said, why? We find such a thing that the two opinions are at the far extremes. Arei Ir Shel Zav. We find that earlier in the Masechta we saw this city of Yerushalayim made out of gold, and basically a tiara with Yerushalayim engraved on it, not the word, but an engravement of the city on it, that Rabbi Akiva had made for his wife Rachel, and the question was, may it be worn on Shabbos? Other people would have similar things. May it be worn on Shabbos or not? And Rabbi Meir Mechayv Chatas, or Meir says if somebody carries that is a Torah prohibition of carrying it in the public domain, and they would have to bring a Chatas offering for wearing it. Rabbi Eliezer Shari Lechatchila, Rabbi Eliezer says it's totally permissible to be done. Not only is it not rabbinically prohibited, and for sure not a Torah prohibition, you're allowed to wear it because it's a total, it's just a garment. It's a garment that's permissible. Ma'i D'Tanya. Where is it? As we looked at the Brisa, a woman should not wear this in a public domain. And if she does, she has to bring a sin offering for transgressing a Torah prohibition of carrying in a public domain. Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim says, they say, she shouldn't go out with it rabbinically on account of maybe she's going to take it off to show someone. However, if she goes out, she's going to be exempt because it's not carrying, it's a garment. And yet their Chachamim say it's prohibited because the garment, even though that it's a garment, but it's something that she may take off to show to a friend and end up carrying it in the public domain for Amos. And so as a concern, the Chachamim said don't wear it. Rabbi Eliezer said, you're allowed to wear it. And he says there's no concern whatsoever because who wears such a tiara? Isha Chashuva, a prominent woman. She's not going to take it off to show to friends in the street. And therefore, it's permissible to be worn. In any case,
Rabbi Meir says that it sounds like everybody agrees except Rabbi Meir that it's bottled to her. Is that right?
I wouldn't say bottled to her. It's a garment.
It's a garment.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Meir says it's not it.
That's not a normal. That's not normal clothing, right? That's not a garment. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye said, "Mi savris abelezad ramekai, da'ama chayv chatas adarbanan kai da'amri pata avalasa." Basically, the Gemara is saying, yeah, it's true. You have an opinion at each end of the extreme, but you have a middle opinion as well. And Rabbi Eliezer is arguing on that middle opinion. Tessa says he doesn't understand. So what? The point of the matter is that we see that it's possible to have a machlokas at the far extremes, where one opinion says something is entirely prohibited even on a Torah level, and the other says, well, it's actually permissible, and even the Chachamim didn't make a prohibition. That's the point. However, the Gemara does say that, well, you would at least have an in-between opinion and not take it to the not just have machlokas at the two extremes. Mishum mai masrina. So the Gemara says, okay, now that we have the statement of Rav Kahana that there would be a Torah prohibition of putting the sediment on this mishameres. So what Torah prohibition is he transgressing? We know in order for somebody to be held accountable for a Torah prohibition, they have to be warned by the witnesses. The witnesses, or they have to have been warned by witnesses that say, by two people that say, don't do this, because if you do, you transgress a Torah prohibition. And then they will pronounce which prohibition. Now they could say, Malacha of Shabbos, you're going to do a Malacha of Shabbos, a general term. That's what it seems. But if they pronounce the specific term, specific Malacha, and they say, because if you do so, you're going to be plowing, right, which is a Torah prohibition, and they're not plowing. They're putting sediment on a sifter, on a cloth, so they'll think that this is a joke, and they won't take it seriously. In order for them to take it seriously, it has to be the correct statement. And if they said the wrong thing, it doesn't count. So what hasra counts for this? So Rabba Amar Mashum Borer. Rabba says Borer, which is the selecting of the good from the bad using a utensil, which is prohibited. Rashi says Rabba doesn't mean to disagree with the next opinion, but he's saying even Borer, even general selecting, which is usually done differently, but nevertheless count as a good warning. Rabbi Zera Maraki. Rabbi Zera says you cannot say separating, selecting, but rather marakid. You have to say sifting, which is using the sifter to get the impurities out of the flour. Amar Rabba Kavasidi di Mistaber. Rabba says it seems that even borer would be a good good warning and would count because this is similar to borer as well. Because what is the act of borer? You're taking the good away from the mixture of bad. So too, and using utensils. So too over here, you are taking the good away from the bad because their mixture is there, and the sediment remains where it is, and the juices are what coming out. So you're selecting the juices away and separating it out from the bad, and that is similar to borer as well. Rabbi Zera says, no, it seems to me that it would only be valid if you mentioned maraked, because borer is not the same. Just as sifting, what remains above is the sediment, the junk, right? The impurities within the flour, the husks or whatever is left in there remain above, and the flour is what comes through. So to over here, what remains above is the sediment, and the juices come down. Whereas in borer, in a selecting, since you're pulling out the good, that is what remains, and the husks and the rest are falling out. Sort of like when you winnow and the wind blows away the husks. Similarly, in this selecting as well, the berries will remain and the husks fall away. Tana Rami Bar Yecheskel, Talis Kafula Liyasev Im Asa Pater Avalasa. One should not, if they're going camping on Shabbos, right? They need to make a tent, so they have a string between one pole and another pole, and they take their cloth tent and they throw it over and create a pup tent in a upside down V shape. You can't do that on Shabbos. They must, and if you did so, you would not have transgressed a Torah prohibition. That's a rabbinic prohibition because it is a temporary and non-firmly established tent. But if it was already on on this string, on this rope, and all he's doing is he's pulling it along to stretch it out to complete it, so sort of like drawing a curtain, that would be permissible. And this is the halacha that a temporary tent, a ohel arai, as long as it's already there and open a little bit, or easily pulled because you have a string or something attached to pull it, that would define it as already there, and you're just stretching it and adding to it and permissible. So yes, what about a canopy over a bed? Now, even the bed, making the bed is prohibited. Mita mahu. They asked them, are you allowed to make a bed? Not only the bed, you can even make the canopy. Kilo mita mahu. Can I make a bed with its canopy? It said the canopy is prohibited, the bed's permissible. All right, so that's cryptic. When he asked about the canopy, he said you can't even make a bed, not only the bed, the canopy. When he asked him about the bed, he said you can make a bed and the canopy. And when he asked him about a bed and canopy, he said, oh, you can't make the canopy, but you may make the bed. So what's going on? And obviously there are three different types of beds and canopies. This that he said you're not allowed to even make the bed, put together the bed. That's talking about beds that are basically an IKEA travel bed. It's a cot that you have to put the parts together. And Rashi says the concern is that you're going to put it in firmly and sort of screw it in or make a peg, put a peg through it, and that's going to be a Torah prohibition of construction. Tues says no, we're talking about a concern of making a space beneath it. Either way, that's a problem. And therefore the bed is going to be prohibited because you're constructing the bed. This that he said that you can even make the canopy. That's like Rami by Yecheskel said that it's already there partially and you're just stretching it. You're pulling it apart. And this that he says the bed is allowed but the canopy is prohibited is like ours, where the beds are upright against the wall. They turn them up horizontally during the day because you need the space, and at night you put them down. You put them up vertically by day, and by night you bring it down, and that's permissible to be done for the bed. But the canopy, which is going to be set up on top of that, will be prohibited because you're making an oil, you're making a space beneath it. So the bed essentially is not made for the space beneath. The canopy is made for the space beneath, and it's prohibited. Amar Rav Yosef Chazino Lekilad Meirav Huna the Meurta Nagida Matzafra Chavita Rabbi. I saw the beds of Rav Huna that at night the canopy was set up. In other words, it was drawn and fully there. And in the morning, I saw them on the ground. So you see that he took it apart. And if you can take it apart, you can put it back together as well. Amarav Meshum Rabbi Chia, so Rav said in the name of Rabbi Chia, Vilon Mutalan Atayse, a Mutal Paka. A vilon, which is a curtain in front of a doorway, that you're allowed to put it on and take it off. Because it's not, Rashi says the reason is, and we saw this several times, Rashi says the reason is because you don't make a tent. The only prohibition of a temporary tent is to make a roof. To make a wall is not going to be prohibited. However, we mentioned that Tues and most of the Rishonim disagree and say no, that it's possible to also make a curtain that would be prohibited, but it's not a necessary curtain. There's no halachic ramifications of that curtain, and therefore you're allowed to draw it and you're allowed to put it there. However, if it had some halachic ramification, then it would be prohibited, such as if you were making a mechitza for a wall of a sukkah, a covering if a couple is in a room and they're going to have relations and there is a sefer there, Sefer Torah or tefillin, and so they're going to draw a curtain in front of that. That's going to be prohibited. But Amar Shmuel, and Shmuel says, Mishum Rabbi Chia, Kilas Chasadim. Now we turn to Kuflam and Chesam and base. Kilas Chasadim mutal l'toisam. A canopy of chasanim, which is a four-cornered canopy. So basically, these are curtains around the bed, as opposed to creating because they're on four posts, as opposed to the ones that are two posts in the shape of a pup tent, as Michael said, the upside down V, where there you're actually creating the roof as well. So kilas chasanim mutal porka, that the four cornered ones, so that you're allowed to put up and down on Shabbos, because you're just making a curtain, you're just making a wall, and it's temporary. Amar Rav Sheshes b'rei Rav Idi lo yamron el she'ein gaga tefach. So this that we say that you can make an upside down two post that sort of looks like a pup tent would only be permissible if there is no tefach wide roof. Aval yesh begaga tefach. But if it has a tefach in the point, the highest point is a tefach, that's going to be permissible, and that's going to be prohibited. Asura. And even if it comes to a sharper point than a tefach, which let's say is 3 inches, 4 inches, even if it comes to a sharper point than that, nevertheless, that would only be if it is on a narrow angle. That if you go 3 tefachim down from the top, it still would not reach 1 tefach wide. However, if the angle is wider, where within the 3 tefachim of the top, which is lavud, right? We've seen this 3 tefachim is a space in halacha that can be negated, and if within 3 tefachim it gets 1 tefach wide, so then you've created a tefach roof, and would be prohibited. Again, creating the roof is the primary ohel arai, temporary tent, that's prohibited. If within 3 tefachim from the top, there doesn't reach a tefach. But if it does reach within 3 tefachim from the top, a tefach wide, that would be prohibited as well, because you're creating a roof. And it would also be that there is no angle tefach. Now this seems to make no sense. It's contradicting the line before, and indeed, the Gra and others take this out. It is a tent. So we leave that out. Then he says another thing. That's only if the curtain doesn't come down and cover the space beneath the bed, 1 tefach. But if it also covers the space beneath the bed, so then we have a problem, because the space beneath the bed is now you've created not only a bed that the usage is for above it, but you've also created a space that's protected by curtain for underneath the bed to store your shoes or whatever other items you want. That would be creating a OL, because you've created now a space beneath, and it would be prohibited. Shari. A wide hat, so a wide brim hat, is going to be prohibited. Is going to be permitted. So, but we learned that it's prohibited. It depends if it has a tefach wide, so we'll say 3-4 inches wide, prohibited. Otherwise, it's permissible. Really, if he spread out his head kerchief or his sleeves 1 tefach, that would also be prohibited. Is that really true? It depends whether it is firmly on, or it may get blown off and he may come to carry. Tell us some nice teachings that you have from Rav. Tarti b'Shabbos v'chad b'Torah. 2 about Shabbos and 1 about Torah. Shalach lein hadatani good b'kisna mutter. So he said this that we learned, that you're allowed to spread this basically a leather cloth, a leather canopy of sorts that you're allowed to attach them to the poles. That's permissible to be done. That's only true if multiple people do it, because then it won't be tied very taut, and it won't count as an oil. It won't count as a tent. But if a single person does it, so he's attaching each tie individually to each corner, and tying up this leather by the straps on each corner, he's going to do so tautly, and therefore it counts as a tent. And a kila, which is a bed canopy, that will be prohibited even with 10 people, because they will do it in a proper taut way. Because it's not possible that it won't somewhat be taut and therefore be count as a tent. What's the other teaching? The Tanya Kira a tent, oven that one of the legs broke off, then it's still usable, and therefore it's going to count as a valid vessel, and you're allowed to move it on Shabbos. But if 2 of the 4 legs fall off, then it's no longer a usable oven and usher, and you're not allowed to move it on Shabbos. And Rav says either way you're not allowed to move it, because we're afraid you may affix it properly, and that's going to be considered creating a vessel, fixing a vessel. What about Torah? What teaching did he have from Rav? Torah. It is in the future that Bnei Yisrael are going to forget Torah. Shenemar, as it says, "V'hafle Hashem es makoscha." Hashem will make your punishment so wondrous, so shocking. What is this shocking punishment that's not mentioned there? Because in the Tochacha, the mention of there are many punishments, physical ailments. So I don't know what this is. But it says in Yeshayahu Hanavi says elsewhere that Hashem says, "Behold, there are days that are going to be I'm going to bring to you even a wonder of wonders, a punishment that is wonder of wonders, that is so shocking." And what is that? Of the chachmas chachamav, that the wise will forget their wisdom, and the bina is going to be forgotten or torn apart. So we see that the hafle v'fela, this wondrous punishment, is that Bnei Yisrael forget Torah. Havo'emer haflazu Torah. Tomorrow it's Rosh Chodesh, so we're going to stop so that they can start davening right away. And tomorrow we'll continue with this loss of Torah, as well as the continuation of this halacha.